My name's Beckett.
My name's Jasper.
If you like this video, hit like, comment, subscribe. Join the Peanut Gallery.
All right, hey, welcome to another episode of the Peanut Gallery. We have with us today our friends Alex and Lisa.
Hi.
Hi. Peanut Gallery. You literally have one job. You're supposed to cheer when we introduce our guests.
Woo!
Anyways, sorry about them. Can't pick your coworkers, I guess. All right. Hey, thanks so much for being here. And I said friends. We just met, Lisa. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Alex, we've known each other for a lot of years. We saved
sure
lives
have.
years ago.
Yes, we did.
Installing seatbelts at Cami.
And the barriers in the front of the vehicle, the silencer pads. Remember those ones?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you drive an Equinox, you're welcome. If they don't work well, it was Friday. I'm sorry. We were tired. There's a lot of night shifts.
There was, yes.
Yeah. So we worked together a couple years, Cami. We got laid off. I got out.
Yep.
You're still there working away?
I still am, yep.
Yeah.
16 years now, I guess. Yeah.
We're getting older too.
We sure are.
So what's it like at Cami right now? You were saying it's still very busy. Are you guys on, off?
So we've been laid off for a substantial amount of time. The pandemic hit our plant really hard with the microchip shortage. So we have some people back in the plant right now, and then we're going back to one shift next week. I'm a union rep, so I'm the human rights employment equity rep and the women's advocate. So my job is a lot different than having to go in there and slug on the floor every day.
Yeah. Very cool. Then you guys are doing a big switch over here shortly, I guess, right? To
yes.
electric?
Yeah, we are. So we have the EV600s coming in, which we're hoping that the retool is going to start in April, but I haven't been in the plant for a few months, so I'm not really up to date on exactly the timelines.
Sure.
It seems that it's been very fluid just because of the global market right now. Right? It's hard to plan anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit wild. Some of the shortages and stuff are pretty unpredictable. I wouldn't have seen it coming. Craziness.
No. Like, I don't think anybody could have predicted even the pandemic in the last 2 years that we've been living through, right? It's been awful.
Right. Well, we could talk about Cami all day, and it would be entertaining. It would be good times.
Let's
but
not, though.
That's not really what we're here for. So you guys offered to come in. I asked. I guess I shouldn't say offered. You guys didn't reach out and be like, hey, listen, we've heard of the Peanut Gallery, biggest podcast in Mount Salem. We think we're the biggest in Mount Salem.
In?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's like 300 here, so it's a big deal. No, we talked about sharing stories, and that's one of the things that we as Peanut Gallery have really wanted to do. We think people need to hear stories. And in a climate where everybody seems to be so extreme and so angry and so much yelling back and forth, I think stories really help us understand each other. I don't think you can solve problems. You can really solve racism, any of that kind of stuff, unless we start listening to each other's stories and understanding where people are coming from. And so that's what we've tried to do over the last year and a half. And so we're really thankful to have you guys on. I believe, Alex, you're going to start. And so the way we're going to start this, we're going to share your stories. We're going to talk about addiction, just talk about life, and then we'll kind of break it down once you guys have shared. That cool?
All right.
Too late to back out now. We're recording. So.
I see that. Okay.
You're up.
Just start?
Just give her.
All right. So for me, I guess, like I really wanted to talk about the struggle with opiates. It was something, I know it's something, I mean, the rates of overdose right now that are happening are astronomical, right. and deaths. That's why you can go to any pharmacy and get Narcan and naloxone because it's happening everywhere. And the problem is that no one really wants to face it, right? No one wants that in their backyard, and I don't think anybody really knows how to tackle the issue.
Well, and one of the things that we were talking about briefly in our conversation was the fact that with COVID, nobody seems to want to talk about anything but COVID.
100%.
But there are these other things going on that seemingly are falling through the cracks where they're like, yeah, we'll deal with that one day. Mm-hmm. Well, no, these are huge problems. And a lot of the restriction stuff, the impact they're having on these different crises, once we finally realize that COVID isn't the end all, we're going to have a lot of trouble to come back to. Like, there's people really struggling and they're being overlooked because everything is just COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the rate of homelessness is up, and a lot of times I was talking to, so we have a joint mental health committee at work that was negotiated between the union and management. So I sit on that committee. So one of my counterparts, they're going to the Woodstock psychiatric unit today to deliver like shampoo, things that are basic needs for us that we often take for granted. And they said that essentially 40% of people that are homeless are ending up in these psychiatric units. And they have no family coming to visit them. And it's like they're just shoving them into these institutions, and nobody's really, we're just putting Band-Aids on all of these problems. And it's never getting fixed. And there's a huge stigma. So I guess, so my personal story, when I was in my early 20s, I ended up in a relationship with someone that was significantly older than I was and had a healthy appetite for OxyContin. And I was young, and I mean, yeah, I like to party too. So once I started using those drugs, right, it's very difficult to get off them. And it's such a physical addiction, because it's very painful. Like the withdrawal process is very painful, which is why we have things like methadone, so that if you can't get off opiates, that is something to help you taper down so that you can be a healthy, functioning member of society, right? Because you can't get up every morning looking for your next fix and get ready and go to work. Like the two it doesn't work, right? So that was a very dark few years for me. It was, I went through a lot of things, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. The one thing that I was so lucky was that I had a very strong, supportive, and loving family. So they never gave up on me. They were always, trying to find me. Where was I? I mean, I remember my mom kicking down doors of these houses, trying to find me and drag me out of there and make me come home. And I had a beautiful life, right? Like I have a great family. I was so far, like I never ever in a million years thought that's where I would end up. Never. And so eventually I ended up, I had enough. And so my mom showed up at this house that I was staying at the one day, and I looked out and I saw her out there, and I refused to answer the door. And then I used one last time, and I called her, and I'm like, "Hey, Mom, what are you doing?" She's like, "I'm actually in Ingersoll." At that time, I was living in Ingersoll. So she came back, and I got in the car with a backpack, and I never, ever went back.
Wow.
And that was it. But that wasn't it, right? Like it takes a long time to repair, and it probably took me a solid 8 years to deal with the financial ramifications of what had happened. I was on methadone at that point. Getting off methadone was one of the most painful things I've ever been through, other than probably childbirth. But
yeah, I've heard rumors that does hurt a little bit. So
but you do it again.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Sure did. But no, so I was on methadone, my parents were taking me. I had to go back to Woodstock to get my drink. I hate saying that, but that's what they call it. Yep. And then I was begging the doctor essentially to wean me down. I didn't want to be on it anymore. And the healthier I was getting, I was going into these clinics and seeing these people, and I'm thinking like that was my life, right? And I don't want to be around these people anymore. Like I felt like when I was there, I was always looking over my shoulder, just very unsafe and uneasy. So eventually I think I was at 14 milligrams of methadone, and I just said to hell with it, and I quit. But it was awful. Like it was horrible. I kept a journal throughout that time, and I didn't sleep more than 6 hours for 47 days. It was horrible. It was awful. Wow. But like I said, I had a really strong and supportive family that were there for me. And yeah, but I think the hardest part is the guilt. Okay, so the shame. The shame is the hardest part. You don't want to talk about it because you feel guilty, right? And through active addiction, you hurt a lot of people that you love. Right. So when you have a clear mind and you have to look back on those things, it's like, how was I that person, right? And that is the toughest part, and that's where it takes years to deal with it. I mean, I still, and it's been since June 6, 2009. Wow. Yeah. So it is. It's always kind of a monkey on your back, I guess. I mean, I don't have any desire to use now. Like I could have it in front of me and I have absolutely no desire. It's not like that. It's just the shame, and it takes a lot of years of, therapy and support, but there's so many people out there that don't have support.
Right.
Like I remember thinking, how in God's name am I going to claw myself out of this hole? Like it's just easier to stay there because you don't want to face your own demons.
Right.
You don't even want to look yourself in the mirror. Right? Like how do you just feel so hopeless. Like how do I repair all of the damage that I have caused?
Right.
And I think it's more mental than it was. I mean, the physical part is awful too, but the mental part of it.
Right.
And there's so much stigma around addicts.
Well, so a couple of questions. We'll talk about this a bit, and then we'll get to Lisa's story. But the one is with opioids, especially, that was something that was new for us when we were first. So as a first responder, they started teaching us that and Narcan and all that. And I remember the guy coming in. He was a pharmacist, and he's just like, "This is not like the normal drug addictions you're going to see, because it will shock you as to who's addicted." And I remember kind of trying to take that in. Kind of, what do you mean? But you begin to realize you have stereotypes of people, and it's certain types of people who get addicted. And you have a story in your head as to what those people are supposed to be. And this opioid addiction is blown all that out of the water. And some of it, I have friends who off of a surgery and end up getting addicted. And there's a lot of that because there's such powerful drugs. And the reason that stereotype matters is because when we give that stereotype, then we can ignore the fact that they still need our support. Mm-hmm. And we can just kind of write them off and go, well, they made that choice. And so when I'm listening to your story, and one of the questions we often think of, how do you help people who are in addictions? And it always comes back to one of the core things is they need somebody who believes in them. They need somebody who will continue to kick down those doors, who will continue to do that. And so I think we have to rewrite that story of addiction so that we keep viewing people as humans instead of viewing them as drug addicts. And I think that changes a lot. Because knowing you, I'm having a hard time. Like I was blown away when you were sharing some of this stuff because I knew the happy Alex who kept me sane during Cami, right? There was a lot of midnight shifts, right? You're so probably midnight shifts. Right, but it blows that away, and you go, okay. So then you begin to go, okay, do I need to revisit the way I'm seeing people out on the streets? Do I need to revisit the way I'm seeing people who get charged with any drug crime, any of that kind of stuff? And I think it really, again, that's the power of story. Mm-hmm. We need to revisit that because we can't just ignore it. This is not a problem that's just going away.
No, it's not. And they're people. Like there's someone's child, there's somebody's brother, sister, aunt, uncle, parent. Right. Like no, and I read this in a book, like no child little things. Like when I grow up, I want to be a heroin addict or I want to be an alcoholic. No one wants that for themselves. Right. It's these things and these traumas that we go through in our life that inevitably pushes them. So I think we need to ask ourselves, like, what happened to that person to put them at this place? And I mean, I've known a lot of addicts, and I'm well known for going and buying like a box of coffee and a thing of like donuts or bagels and going and just sitting with them and just talk to them. Like there's a lot of places in St. Thomas, and I will. Like in the winter, I went and picked up a box of hand warmers from Costco and a big thing, 2 things of muffins from there. And I just went there and handed it to them out on the streets and then sat with them. They just want someone to talk to them, right? And to feel accepted. And I don't know, it's a losing battle right now because we've lost a lot of services, especially in the beginning of the pandemic when, I mean, rehab centers were closing down and detox centers. And I mean, I could go on about rehab and detox for hours, but I won't.
Yeah, no, yes. All right, we'll get back to that in a bit. Lisa, can you share your story with us?
So mine, again, rooted from mental health as a child. I didn't know that. I really started down. I always drank to get drunk when I drank. But I really spiraled out of control approximately 2009, where I got into a marriage, a relationship to start, and then ultimately in a marriage that both of us liked to party. And I guess I grew up with an alcoholic father, and I adored my dad. But I always saw myself as not as bad as him. So I was able to justify it that way. The marriage was very toxic that I ended up in. And eventually, well, we're fortunate at CAMI. We have an EAP rep who's just retiring. But he's been so good for our membership and for me. I would reach out to him probably every few months and say, I need help. And then I'd say, no, I can't go away from my kids. I can't go to rehab. And then I would reach out again and then, no, I can't. And eventually one day in 2015, I followed through and I went to rehab. However, and I wanted it, and I came out of rehab like I was gonna stay sober, and I was on this pink cloud, and I was gonna help everybody with all of my vast knowledge that I had learned, and I was just gonna change the world, And what I didn't know at that time, and I didn't know until 2019, was that I was dealing with some major mental health issues that I had no idea the way my brain was working was very unhealthy. And so I would go 2 or 3 months with some sobriety, and then something would happen and I would have a one-night relapse. And this happened numerous times. I would give my family hope that I was going to get sober, and then I would disappoint them. And I would disappoint myself. And the shame and the guilt that went along with that. I felt like I was never going to get it. So I started having, like, when Alex talks about a supportive family, my family loves me, but they had had enough. They just didn't want to be disappointed anymore. So I didn't have that support. Or understanding, I guess. I didn't have the understanding, but I did have our EAP rep. And he encouraged me time after time. He was always so supportive, and I thank God for him. Anyhow, I went through a few different mental health programs in Guelph at Homewood, and I was finally diagnosed with PTSD and complex PTSD. And then I started treatment for those. And so I took cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy, and finally cognitive processing therapy. And now since 2019, I've been in recovery from my mental health illnesses, and I have had continuous sobriety.
Awesome. Wow.
Pretty amazing.
All right. So a couple things. What's an EAP rep?
It's actually now called EFAP. So it's Employee and Family Addiction.
Employee Family Addiction Program.
Right.
Okay. So how does that work? Just what does that look like in a workplace?
We have a representative that we can go to who can help guide us into counseling of sorts if we need a counselor for any struggles, can help get us admitted into a rehab facility. One thing I would like to see changed at CAMI that isn't happening right now is, in my experience, with my own story and with many people I've met along my journey, a lot of the root of alcoholism and addiction and drug addiction is mental health.
Right.
At CAMI, right now, I think in GM as a whole, we're only covered to go to addictions programs. you can go to a mental health program and that will be covered as long as you have an addiction attached.
Right.
My struggle with that is why not do the coverage for the mental health programs prior to that person falling down the rabbit hole of addiction? Why not get the root first?
Right. Well, and we've talked to people at multiple levels about this, the fact that we keep talking about the mental health crisis, but then the services we need aren't actually attainable. So the counseling that you got, that's awesome. The majority of people can't afford it.
No, they can't.
I mean, you're talking the counselors in our region are anywhere from 120 to 170 an hour. And it's not stuff that you can just go in for an hour and be like, okay, I'm good. This takes, months, and it takes sessions and sessions, but it's not attainable. And so when you're dealing with addiction and you're looking, you're kind of, okay, I see my way out, but I can't afford it.
Right.
Like, how are we allowing this? How are we okay with this?
We do have some coverage at CAMI as far as seeing a psychologist goes, but we'll cover maybe 4 sessions.
Right.
We also have another program called LifeWorks that we deal with. But again, that's very short term.
Right.
It's not long term. And you're absolutely right. It's expensive.
Right.
And our coverage only covers so much. It's a little bit of a funny story, I guess it was for me, but I reached out to a therapist to go through counseling like during this pandemic. But for our benefits, you have to have your master's of social working. So she's like, yeah, I have my MSW. Well, I saw her 4 times and she wouldn't send me her certificate. So I was in the hole for $600 during the pandemic. And like, only I get ripped off by a therapist. Like I don't know if it was like weird karma for us or what. But like, I'm like, this is BS.
Well, and if you're lucky enough to have an employer and a union who does that for you, but a lot of people aren't. And so now you end up, and that's it's been one of my struggles. The more I learn about this, the more you kind of go, we keep saying we want this to stop, but unless we actually put in the time, the effort, and the finances to do it, it's not just going to go away just because you build a homeless shelter. That doesn't end it. I mean, it's a short-term, it's emergency housing, but that doesn't eliminate all these other problems that are actually at the root, at the core of it.
Absolutely.
Right?
I think right now, in my perspective, or from my perspective, psychiatry isn't what it used to be. Psychiatry, you used to be able to go see a psychiatrist and sit there with it for an hour with them once a week or once every 2 weeks, and they would listen to you and work quite closely with you. Now it takes months to get into a psychiatrist, and you're often there for like 15 or 20 minutes, and they hand you a prescription or have you watch a video on bipolar and say, do you relate with this? Well, anybody with any mental health illness can relate with that because you've been in depression before.
If any parent can.
Right.
Yep.
So, and then they send you on your way with a prescription, right? And for me, it took me changing the way my brain worked. So a prescription it's necessary for some people, for sure, to get them stable enough in order to be able to do those therapies. But I don't think sending people off with a prescription, and I think that getting right down to, because I was misdiagnosed for years about it wasn't until I worked with a psychiatrist quite closely at Homewood that we finally got to what the root of it was. Right. And I needed that in order to know which way to go to fix it. I needed that. Being misdiagnosed, one time I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And some of the symptoms of that, it fit. And I was warned by that psychiatrist, like, don't take cognitive behavioral therapy because that could be harmful to somebody with borderline. So I was scared of cognitive behavioral therapy. And then when I ended up taking cognitive behavioral therapy, it fascinated me. I could see the way my brain would do all of these thought distortions and where it would lead me. And it fascinated me and it excited me because if I could see it happening in myself, then I could stop it, right? So if I just I don't know. I think getting to the real diagnosis is really key.
All right. So I don't know if you have specific things you guys want to cover yet. One of my questions would be for you guys to give me a bit of what would you say to addicts who are currently struggling, and what would you say to families around? Because it is hard. I mean, in this setting here, we can sit here and say whatever, but when it is your family member or when you're in it's freaking hard, right? And and so we don't want to make this super simple, but at the same time, we have to have honest conversations, right? And so, what are your thoughts?
So as far as family goes, I've had family that have struggled and currently struggle with addiction, and it's difficult as a family member because you don't want to enable them, right? Enabling is huge when you're constantly. I didn't finally get my act together until essentially like I was cut off financially by my they were sick of like trying to keep my hydro on or anything like that, right? Because if you continue to enable that person, it's just easier for them to stay in that life. But the other thing is that no one is going to get clean unless they want it. Like they have to hit their rock bottom. And I think it's really important to just kind of support them along the way, to continue to show them love and let them know that you're there for them. And I think it's really important for family to attend. Like I spent a long time in NA, and they also have group support for families. I know my family went to it, and it was nice to be able to lean on other people that are going through a similar situation, right? Because it's easy to get angry at them for how they're behaving. It's easy to say, like, get better, smarten up. What are you doing? Like, get your stuff together. Why are you doing this? But it's a totally different battle when you're the one actually going through it, right? Because they already feel horrible about themselves, right? They already think that they are like bottom feeders. I don't think there's many addicts or alcoholics that are super proud of who they are, right? Or out there like, oh, look at me.
It's a false ego if it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, it's good, and you know what? It's a challenge. So when we've worked with some families, to know what that looks like, and everybody wants a bit of a black and white. This is but it's hard. It's hard to know. Do you just let them go, and when is that line, and what does rock bottom look like, and then even the question becomes, and part of our work with Family Central has been, how do you navigate those who don't want to change yet?
Mm-hmm. Because there's so much that comes along with addiction, like I wouldn't want someone actively using hard drugs and like coming into my home because I wouldn't trust them. And I hate to say that, but it's true. Like I think, yes, it's important to show love, but it's also important to have boundaries. Like you need to have boundaries with them.
Right.
And as hard as it is sometimes, if somebody is actively using and that's what they want, then we almost have to like respect their decision, right? And I think it's also important to remember that that's not who they actually are. Like when you're under the influence and you're of addiction, that's not the actual person that you are, right? It changes your brain. It makes you a different human being than when you have a clear head. I mean, the brain is such a powerful thing, right?
Yeah.
It is. And the thing about like mental illness, addiction, all of that is that like we can't see when somebody's brain is sick, right? If somebody has cancer or they're things that we can see, we feel worse for them, right? Like if somebody's in the hospital with another kind of disease, we'll send them flowers, visit them, cards, right? If someone's brain is sick, it's like, just be happy, like pull it together.
Right. You would never tell that to somebody with a broken arm.
No,
just
never. Like
pull your arm together.
Pull it together, dude. You're
fine.
Fine. Shake it.
It sounds
shake
ridiculous, but it's so true. And the more we
true.
understand about the brain, the more we realize that is 100% accurate. So much of the stuff happens in the brain, but that's the one because we can't really see it.
That's exactly what it is.
I'm actually taking a psychology course right now, and I've been studying a lot of the connections in the brain and the loss of connections in the brain that happens. And it's fascinating, but those connections can be reestablished. That's the thing, that they can be reestablished.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, one thing at work we were trying to do, and I talked briefly about our joint mental health committee, is we've been having, like, before the pandemic, what we were doing was as a group, we were going in and sitting down with our members and just kind of giving a brief talk with them and about the same thing, like the stigma around it, and that there's a lot of people at work that you work with every single day, beside them. And you know what it was like at
Yep.
CAMI. You work side by side for 8 hours a day. You spend more time with these people than you do with your own families.
Right.
And a lot of them are suffering in silence. Like, just be a compassionate, like, just be a kind, compassionate human being.
Right.
Is that too much to ask? Like, just be nice.
Right.
And if somebody's missing for 5 days from work, give them a call. Like, is everything all right? How's things going? I mean, you don't have to. It's just
Right.
it's just a decent thing to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if some of this, we've talked in other podcasts with people that we've given so much of this over to the government. So addiction isn't something I need to deal with because there's addiction services.
Mm-hmm.
And there's these programs. And so we almost shift that burden. Well, it takes a lot of work to be compassionate. It takes a lot of work to love. What's much easier is just to say, well, there was a program you could have entered. Like, go do it. And I think we need to take that back and say, no, I need to care for my own community. I need to care for my own neighbors. And I think that'll have way more impact than any of these government services. Because part of the issue with psychiatry, part of the issue with any of the services is they're so overwhelmed. I remember my wife worked for one of the social agencies, and her caseload would be double what she's supposed to have. Well, with a double caseload, you're doing half the amount of work for each family that you should. And so then you get the workers, and you're mad at the workers. But when you're overloaded, there's not much you can do. And I think we need to take some of that back and take some of that ownership. Because we did have 8 hours side by side. There's no reason we couldn't have a good conversation. Right? But it takes work, and I think we skim away from that. And I think it's a shame. And I think we're seeing these consequences, right? And
I think most people in the world have someone close to them, either a friend or a family member, that has either struggled with addiction, alcoholism, or mental illness.
100%.
Like, it's all around us.
Right.
We just don't want to talk about it. Like, we want to put those people in a closet, be like, I don't know them. Or
Right.
I don't know how they turned out like that.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I have found in my experience in the past few years at CAMI, though, that I have had many conversations with people who are struggling because I'm very, like, I'm not shy about telling my story. I'm not proud of the things I did in my life, in my alcoholism. However, it took that to get me to who I am now, and that person I'm proud of.
Right.
So I'm not afraid to share my story with other people, just because if I can open up about it, somebody might feel comfortable
Right.
opening up about it as well, right?
And that's the power of story. If
Right.
you share your story and all of a sudden people go, okay, well, this is somebody I feel safe enough that you know what, I actually struggle with something too. And now all of a sudden you have dialogue, right? Yeah.
Right. And it's so exciting because for me, I didn't know what self-worth was. My whole life, I didn't understand. One of my earliest memories was wishing I hadn't been born. And I remember sitting at, when we had those station wagons where you sat backwards, I remember sitting back there crying, wishing I had not been born. And anyhow, I didn't know what self-worth was, ever. And in my journey and in my healing, I found that. And I found it's really hard for me to articulate, but it's a sense of peace that I didn't know existed. I just didn't even know it existed. And I think that there's so many other people out there who don't know that this exists. This kind of peace exists. And I want people to find that. I really want people to find that. It's changed. My world has changed, right? It's worth living.
All right, so we're going to run out of time here, but I want to ask one final question. That is, what do you say to people about staying clean? Because that is a challenge. You guys have both talked about how incredibly hard that is. What have you learned would be a better question. What have you learned about staying clean?
You just have to put in the work. Like if you want something bad enough, you will do it, right? And eventually it does get easier.
What are some of the things that you used? So you talked about NA. What's that?
Narcotics Anonymous.
Okay.
So it's meetings. I never went to rehab. I went to detox for a very brief stint. I think I was in there for 7 days, which is the length of time that you go for detox generally. So through that program, it was at Holmes House in Simcoe. I had gone to meetings there. Like I said, my parents were really, really supportive of me. So they would take me. I didn't have a license at the time or anything. So they would drive me to the meetings. And I think it's important, so I moved, most of my active addiction was in Woodstock, and I had to get out of Woodstock. Like they say you need to change the people, places, and things, and that is very, very important. Like you can't sit and use drugs with somebody for 2 years and then go and kick it with them on the weekends and think you're not going to use, right? You need to completely change, who you're around, the company that you keep, and the things that you do. It's very important.
So Narcotics Anonymous, I'm assuming you just Google that and the groups would kind of show up similar to the way AA works?
Yeah, absolutely. It is essentially the same platform as AA. They have meetings all over. There's meetings in St. Thomas. Like they're everywhere.
Okay.
And it's a great resource. It doesn't necessarily, I think there's quite a few people that are opposed to the 12-step program, which is fine. I think whatever program you use that helps you stay clean and sober is great.
Right. There isn't a one-size-fits-all for everybody.
No, there isn't.
No, for sure.
No.
So one of the things I'm going to ask you is at the end is we're going to post a bunch of these links. And you guys have mentioned a bunch of stuff, so it'd be nice to post some of that. Because there is a piece, especially if you're new to this or if you don't have family who's gone through it before, you don't even know where to really start. So there are services, but you may not be aware of them, and so I want to do that. Anything you would add about staying sober?
For me, I needed to get myself emotionally and mentally happy or healthy. I needed to take accountability. I really needed to see what I had done. Granted, there are probably things I've done that I don't even remember, right? Because I was blacked out or whatnot, that are really hard to apologize for now. But I had to take accountability and repair relationships so that I could have that support around me. And yeah, I've got a really full, loving family now, and I just think mental health is the key.
Okay. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, but also just thanks for what you guys are doing. And I love what you said and just talking with people. And I think bringing that out and bringing out your story and giving people hope, because I do think, and you talked about this, but when you're at that bottom, you need somebody to be able to say, look, okay, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. And I think your stories are inspiring, and I appreciate you guys coming on.
Thanks for having us.
So links will be provided. Guys, if you guys are going through this, reach out. Family members, there are so many good resources. It's a tough thing, but let's keep fighting for each other. See you on the next one.